At first light, with the desert still holding its breath, a tired cowboy stood beside a fence and pressed a single silver coin into his palm. $1. That's what the Apache elder had offered for the last horse he owned, the last piece of good fortune he'd kept alive through dust, drought, and long nights under a shrinking moon. People in town whispered that he was foolish, or proud, or both. But the cowboy only said, "Deal's a deal," and watched the bay gelding nuzzle his sleeve like it knew something holy was taking shape. He hadn't started poor, it started stubborn. Then the rains forgot the land. Cattle thinned, fences sagged, and even the wind sounded hungry across the flats. Selling his last horse wasn't just business. It felt like cutting loose a part of his own heart. He had raised that animal from a skittish colt, trained it to move with a soft hand, to turn at a whistle, to trust. When the Apache elder rode in, quiet as a prayer and twice as steady, the cowboy expected a fair price. Instead, the elder slid down, touched the horse's shoulder, and offered $1. "This is not payment," the elder said. "It is a token. A promise sealed small, so it cannot be broken big." The cowboy could have laughed, could have cursed, could have walked away. Instead, he looked into the elder's eyes and saw a kind of dawn that didn't belong to the sky. "What promise?" he asked. The elder's answer was simple and strange. "At dawn, in 2 days' time, wait at the ridge above the dry wash. Bring your hat, bring your word. 100 riders will come. We will honor you." The elder spoke like someone who knew the land before fences, who knew horses before dollars, and the cowboy felt something loosen in his chest. He took the coin, he gave the reins. He tried not to let the ache show. After the elder led the horse away, the town kept its talk. Poor cowboy, sold his last horse for $1. Maybe he'd finally broken. Maybe he'd been tricked. Walked home with that coin warmed by his hand, and the warmth stayed even after sunset. On the trail, he remembered times he'd ridden through thunderclouds and brush fires, crossed the bitter edge of winter, coming home with sore bones and a quiet grin. A man could live poor, he thought, but he couldn't live faithless. Elder called it a promise, then the cowboy would keep his part. All night, he listened to the desert breathe. Coyote pulled a thread of sound across the dark. Somewhere a windmill turned like a broken clock. He brewed coffee that tasted like smoke and pennies, laid the coin next to his cup and traced the worn date with a thumb. He thought about the elder's hands, steady on the horse's neck, and how the gelding had lifted its head like it recognized an old song. He thought about the word honor, how light it sounded, and how heavy it felt. The next day, he walked to the ridge the elder had named. The path was clean and quiet, as if 100 hooves had paused at the edge and waited for permission. A skeet leaned into the sky. A hawk made small circles, patient and sure. "Ah!" The cowboy took off his hat and held it against his chest, imagining the shape of that many riders strung across the horizon. He pictured their horses' paints and bays, roans and chestnuts moving as one. He pictured the elder at the front, carrying the calm of someone who doesn't hurry even when he moves fast. He pictured himself with empty hands, wondering whether emptiness might be the first form of courage. Back in town, he kept 2 small tasks: mended a gate, oiled a saddle he no longer needed. He thought about every mile his horse had carried him, across dry riverbeds that glinted like glass, through canyons that answered each footfall with a low echo. The gelding had taught him patience. The land had taught him respect. The Apache elder's eyes had taught him a new kind of quiet. He didn't try to explain any of it. Some things don't survive being said out loud. Evening shaded the world in soft metal. He slept a little, woke at midnight, slept a little more. When the first gray smudge appeared on the far edge of the sky, he rose and put on his cleanest shirt, the one with seams worn smooth, where rains had once rubbed against his wrist. He took the $1 coin and tucked it into the inside pocket of his vest. Then he walked out to the ridge and stood where the pale earth drops to the dry wash. The air smelled like creosote and promise. He waited. At first he thought the sound was wind and grass. Then he heard it clearer, the distant, steady thunder of hoofs, not wild, not hurried, but measured, as if each step knew exactly where to land. A line began to form on the horizon. then 2 lines, and too many to count until the sun reached up and poured light over everything, turning dust into a curtain of gold. Riders, not 10, not 50, 100, just as the elder had said. They moved in a long arc, horses breathing in unison, leather creaking, bits chiming soft as bells. The cowboy's throat tightened in a way he didn't expect. He put his hat to his chest and tried to stand tall. The riders drew near and split into 2 wings, circling slow until they faced him in a wide crescent. Faces lifted, eyes bright with the clear kind of attention that makes a man feel both seen and small. Some riders were young, some were old, some carried eagle feathers tied into their horse's mane, some wore simple shirts and the dust of travel. In the center sat the Apache elder, upright and easy, the cowboy's former horse standing beneath him with ears pricked forward as if it too were listening for something sacred. No one spoke at first. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of miles traveled in the dark, of stories passed down like water, of promises that didn't fit in a pocket. The elder dismounted and walked forward. He stopped in front of the cowboy and raised an open palm, the kind of greeting that says we meet as people before we meet as anything else. The cowboy nodded. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. "You kept your word," the elder said, his voice low, made of gravel and warmth. "Right." The cowboy nodded again, not trusting his own voice. The elder's eyes moved to the coin bulging the vest pocket. "And you kept the token." Another nod. The elder glanced back at the riders, then returned his gaze to the man on the ridge. "Kept ours." "What does it mean?" the cowboy wanted to ask. For 100 riders to arrive at dawn to honor a poor man who sold his last horse for $1? What debt had he unknowingly paid? What path had he unknowingly walked? He remembered helping a traveler years ago at the edge of a storm, guiding a lost pair of Mustangs away from a broken fence, returning a small bundle he'd found near a spring wrapped in red cloth, tied with respect. He remembered acting because it was right, not because it would ever be seen. But if those moments mattered, if those threads had woven him into a larger story, then this morning was the fabric turned outward for all to witness. The elder reached into his own coat and took out something small. He closed the cowboy's hand around it. The cowboy felt the shape, another coin worn smooth by time. "This," the elder said, "belonged to someone who believed that a good deed is a trail that never ends." The cowboy swallowed. The wind pressed against the riders' horses and they stood still, as if this place were a church without walls and the service had just begun. The elder looked past the cowboy to the horizon. "Before the sun clears that ridge," he said, "we will tell you why we came." Around them, the hush deepened. A hawk cut one last circle overhead and vanished into the brightening blue. The earth seemed to lean in. The riders lifted their chins, ready. The cowboy drew a breath that tasted like cedar smoke in morning. He opened his hand to see the coin and saw something else beneath it. Something folded tight, tied with a thin strip of leather, marked with a sign he recognized but couldn't yet place. Then the sun began to crest, and the elder took a step closer. And the first words of the reason of the honor ride, of the promise, of the $1 bond rose up like the light itself. The elder's first words were not loud. They moved like a stream under ice, steady and sure. He said the riders had followed the same stars for a long time to get here. He said the land remembers more than people do. He said a promise can start small, like a coin in a pocket, and grow into something large enough to fill a valley. The cowboy held the folded strip of leather and felt the weight of the second coin in his palm. He didn't open the leather yet. He waited because the waiting felt like part of the honor itself. Dust floated around the horses in slow halos. At dawn, the light makes edges soft, and yet the moment felt sharp. The poor cowboy who sold his last horse for $1 stood there with his hat to his chest. And all he could think about was the bay gelding, and the day he first saw it. A thin colt, skittish as a leaf. He had gentled that animal with patience, not rope. He had learned that a steady hand could be louder than a shout. Maybe that was why the Apache elder had looked at him the way he did when he offered the $1. Maybe the elder saw the long trail behind the man, not just the empty corral, before the elder spoke again. The cowboy's memory went back to a summer when the river overran its bed. The dry wash wasn't dry then, it raged. He'd found a small bundle caught in branches after the water fell away, bundle wrapped in red cloth tied with respect. He hadn't opened it. He didn't need to. He had carried it to a trail he knew was used by riders who moved without fanfare, and left it there with a small cairn of stones. For years he wondered if anyone ever found it. He never told the story in town. Some things are not meant for talk. The elder took one step to the side, and the riders behind him changed their grip, a quiet rustle of leather and cloth. The cowboy thought of other acts he had done and then forgotten, like giving his last bag of salt to a stranger whose horses were spent, or opening a fence so a band of Mustangs could slip away from a storm that came on too fast. He had never done these things for reward. But maybe the land had kept score. Maybe the land had friends who ride at dawn. You gave back what was not yours, the elder said, as if he had reached into the cowboy's memory and held up that one moment for the light to touch. You gave it back without asking who it belonged to, and without asking what it was worth. He nodded toward the dry wash. Once, that water took too much and left something behind. You corrected the balance. Small, people would say, but balance cares about small. The cowboy opened his fingers slightly and looked at the second coin. The surface was worn smooth, thin as a story told many times. Along the edge, a few faint marks remained, like teeth of a wheel. He did not know the year. He did not need the year. He slid the coin back into his palm and let his hand close. The folded leather stayed unopened. It felt warm, as if it had kept another person's pulse for a long time and wasn't ready to cool. Around them, the riders sat their horses like they were part of the slope. A few horses stamped, impatient, then calmed at a touch. The bay gelding lifted its head when the wind shifted and the cowboy's scent drifted across. It made a small sound, low and familiar. The cowboy's throat tightened. He had sold that horse for $1 to the Apache elder. And today, the gelding stood in a circle that felt like a living ring of promise. If this was a story for a campfire or a YouTube video, people might think the number 100 riders was put there for show. But the riders were not a number. They were a line of lives that had crossed the cowboy's life. Some he knew about, and some he never would. The elder spoke of a trail cut long before barbed wire, a path that wound from spring to spring. He told how one winter a boy and his grandfather missed the sign of a storm and were caught between ridges with failing horses. A man on a bay gelding had come from the dark, like a piece of dawn that had lost its way. He had said nothing, only pointed to a low pass where the wind broke and the ground held. The boy had lived, and the elder had not forgotten. The cowboy did not remember saving any boy. He did remember riding on a night when the wind sounded like broken glass and finding a small fire dying under a ledge. He had tossed in dry wood and moved on. He hadn't thought it mattered to anyone but the cold. The elder said there are many ways to return a horse. Sometimes you give back a real animal and a rope. Sometimes you give back a road. Sometimes you give back time. The cowboy thought about all the stories that had brushed past his life and kept going. It made him dizzy. It made him feel like the desert itself had a long memory and a steady gaze. The riders shifted again, and a young woman near the edge of the crescent loosened a pouch and held something up so the light caught it. It was a small metal disc, no bigger than a thumb, with a hole worn through as if it had been tied to a string for years. The cowboy did not recognize it, but it matched the feeling in his hand. Tokens, coins, promises. The elder nodded to her and then back to the man on the ridge. "We mark things that matter," he said. "We do not always mark them with money. But a coin is heavy enough to make a pocket, remember." The cowboy's mind went to the windmill at his place, the one that groaned at night when the breeze shifted. He had once taken the whole thing apart and put it back together with new bolts and a thin measure of grease. No one saw him do it, but the trough filled again, and the cattle came, and the birds came, and sometimes people came too. He'd never thought that counted as anything but a chore. The elder spoke as if such things were the very ground of a promise. "You think you are poor?" the elder said gently. You think you have nothing but an empty corral and a hat you keep clean. But the land counts in a different way. He tipped his chin toward the riders. These are not here for a show. They are here because a word was kept, and a word kept is wealth. The cowboy looked down at the folded leather again. He finally eased the knot loose. Inside was a small strip of faded cloth, the same deep red as the bundle he had once returned. Tied to the cloth was a brittle sprig of sage, and there was a mark drawn on the leather in thin lines. A sign he half remembered from a time. He had guided a lost pair of mustangs away from a fence and seen a similar mark burned into an old post. He felt heat on his face, the sudden sun climbing the ridge, turning every edge brighter. He remembered the day he sold the bay gelding for $1. He had felt stripped down to bone. The token had seemed like a poor joke, a thin promise that might break. Now the coin in his vest felt like a key, and the second coin felt like a door he had not yet opened. He wondered what lay behind that door. Land story? Debt? Freedom? He could not ask. His voice would not come. The elder turned, and the riders leaned forward as one body. Hoofbeats shifted, not going anywhere yet, just reminding the earth they were here. The elder spoke slowly, each word placed like a stone. He said the bundle the cowboy had returned had carried names. Not names for a ledger. Names for a line of people who had crossed this desert and wanted their children to cross it too. To leave a bundle in a safe place is to say, we will come back this way. To return it is to say, we know you belong here when you come. The cowboy's chest ached. He thought of borders he had respected without quite knowing why gates he had closed behind him. Trails he had left unmarked when he could have blurred them. Water he had used and then shared. He thought of the bay's careful feet on narrow ledges. The way the horse had always chosen the older trail, even when the new trail looked faster. Who teaches a horse to do that? Maybe the land does. Maybe the horse does. Maybe the rider learns last. The elder lifted his hand, and the riders answered with a sound that was not a shout and not a song, something in between. It rose and fell like wind moving through grass, and the cowboy felt the fine hairs on his arms stand up. The sound held gratitude. It also held warning, but not a threat. A reminder, promises are not one-way roads. They need to be kept more than once. They need to be walked again and again, at dawn, at dusk, in dust and rain. The cowboy looked down the slope to the dry wash, now quiet, its curls of sand drawn into lines by the wind. He saw tracks there, old ones overlapped with new, the way lives cross and recross without anyone planning it. He saw a fox's print beside a horse's. He saw boot marks in a place he did not remember stepping. He felt small. He felt held up by something that didn't need his permission to exist. Before the sun is high, the elder said, we will ride with you two to places. One, you know, one you do not. At both, we will ask for your word again. He paused, and the silence after the words held more than the words themselves. The cowboy nodded because the nod was all he could manage. His mouth was dry. His hands were steady. His knees wanted to sit down. The bay gelding stepped forward one pace of its own, as if drawn by an old habit. The elder did not tug the rein. He let the horse choose that single step. The gelding's ears flicked toward the cowboy, and in that small tilt of bone and skin, 1,000 miles of riding passed between them. The cowboy breathed a little easier, and then felt the breath catch again, because the elder turned and pointed to the far ridge where the light was thickest. The riders shifted as if they had listened to a word no one else heard. On the strip of leather, the thin mark looked like a river and a path at the same time. The cowboy traced it with a thumb and felt the shallow groove left by someone else's hand many years ago. The second coin pressed against his palm, warmer now, almost hot. He wondered what price would be asked next, if the $1 he took was a beginning or a measure. He wondered if a man could be both honored and tested in the same breath. He tucked the leather back into his vest and lifted his hat to set it firm on his head. He met the elder's eyes. There was no anger there, no pity, only a steady weight that said, you are not alone in this. The riders adjusted, a wave of easy motion. The hoofbeats began to fall into a slow rhythm, not yet a ride, yet, but ready. The elder finally gave the smallest sign, and the horses shifted as if the earth itself had nodded. The cowboy took one step down the slope toward the dry wash. The sound of 100 riders gathering swelled and then softened, like a breath drawn and held. He felt the trail under his boots as something living. He felt the day open like a gate. And before the first hoof moved in earnest, before the honor ride truly began, the elders said a last quiet thing the cowboy would think about for years. "Do you remember the face of the person who taught you your first word?" The elder asked. "Think of that face and keep it with you. Where we go next, you will need it." The cowboy did not ask why. He could not. The desert's silence pressed close, and the ridge burned brighter. He thought of a kitchen with a dirt floor, a cup of black coffee, a hand that steadied his own when he was small. He held the picture like a fresh coin. Then the riders lowered their chins. The bay shook its mane. The elder raised his palm once more, and the first step of the ride award, the place he knew and the place he did not, hung. For one long heartbeat between the promise made and the promise yet to be. Capped the first steps down the slope felt like. Stepping into a river you couldn't see, the ground held, but the day moved under him. The cowboy kept the picture of that first face in his mind like the elder asked, a hand steadying a cup, a voice teaching a word slow and kind. Behind him and around him, the honor ride gathered itself. 100 riders and one quiet purpose. The bay gelding breathed in a way he knew by heart. He could feel the old rhythm of the saddle, even without sitting in it. He let the sound of hoofbeats carry him forward. They headed first toward the place he knew, the windmill. The small, stubborn well that kept his stretch of desert alive. He watched the land open and fold, the dry wash running like a pale thread beside them. The young woman who had lifted the metal disc earlier rode near the edge, eyes on the path. She didn't stare at him. No one did. They gave him space, but the space was full. He could feel their trust press against his shoulders like a blanket you do not own, but are allowed to use. The elder rode a little ahead, not looking back much. He didn't have to. People followed him the way they follow water down a draw. The cowboy knew this road by boot and by hoof. He had fixed ruts here with a shovel when storms cut them too deep. He had carried a calf here once, stubborn as a sack of rocks. He had watched lightning strike far off and count heartbeats to judge distance. He had learned this country by listening to it keep its own counsel. The closer they came to the windmill, the more a new color crept into the ground. Bright flags stuck in the dirt, red and orange and blue. They were the kind of flags surveyors carry. The cowboy felt his jaw tighten. He had seen a few flags here a week ago, then a dozen. Now there were dozens more, each one claiming a small square of sky. He glanced at the elder. The elder saw, but he did not rush. They found a map tacked to a low post, the paper punch-holed by wind. Lines crossed and crossed, neat and sure. A box was drawn around the windmill. Someone had written a word in the corner in a hard hand, easement. The cowboy had always kept a gate open on this side. He had never asked anyone to write it down. The path had been here longer than he had been alive. He didn't need a word on paper to tell him where people belonged. A second mark spoke louder. On a fence post near his trough, fresh burned scars formed a brand he did not recognize. Not a neighbor. Not a ranch. The kind of mark a big company uses when it wants a line to look permanent. The cowboy touched the char with 2 fingers. It flaked under his skin and left a black smudge. The bay gelding flicked an ear toward him and then back to the elder as if to say, "See? The ground remembers, but men keep trying to write over it." "We came here because this is one of the places," the elder said. "Once, when the river ran high and took more than it should, this windmill gave back." He pointed to the trough. "You kept it turning for more than cattle." The cowboy remembered strangers cupping water. Not speaking, only nodding thanks with their eyes. He had liked those quiet nods. They said nothing and everything. The elder faced him. "We ask you for your word again. Not a paper. Your word. Keep this gate open. Keep the trough full when you can. If people come through at dusk or dawn, let them pass in peace. The cowboy wanted to say yes, because yes was already sitting in his chest. But the flags, those small, bright teeth, nipped at the edge of the moment. He cleared his throat. "There's talk in town," he said, keeping his voice even. "A land company. A line to be laid. They told a man at the store it would be good for jobs, good for the county. They said some trails will be closed while they work. They said it's all lawful." He didn't mention that a man with a clean hat and a ledger had already made him an offer for the land around the windmill. A fair price for a poor cowboy. The man had smiled as if kindness were a coin he carried loose. The elder nodded like he had expected this. "Lawful and right are not the same word," he said. "We respect the law. We also respect the road that came before the law. We are not here to fight. We are here to stand in the open and ask you to stand too." The riders fanned quietly. Some dismounted and walked to the trough with cupped hands, splashing their faces as if waking up twice. A boy tied a long strip of cloth to a post. Not a claim. A reminder. A soft color against the wood that would outlast the flags after wind did its slow work. From a distance, separate line of dust lifted. Not a storm. Riders of another sort. The cowboy recognized the angle of their hats and the way they sat the saddle like men who ride roads. Not trails, deputies, not many. Maybe 3. Enough to deliver a message. The cowboy felt the old knot pull tight under his ribs. He thought of the face he had been told to remember. He kept it. They came to a stop a dozen paces away, hands easy, thumbs hooked in belts. The lead deputy was the kind of man who could be friendly if the day let him. The cowboy had once seen him carry a sleeping child out of a church when the heat got bad. The deputy took in the 100 riders with a long, careful look. He tipped his hat to the elder. "Respect first. Then duty. Heard there was a gathering," he said. "We're asked to keep the road clear for survey crews. Work scheduled here today." He nodded at the flags. "I don't make the plan. I just read it." The elder didn't raise his voice. "We'll be gone before the sun stands tall," he said. "We came to ask for a word and to give one." He placed his palm over his chest and then let it fall. The deputy watched the gesture like a man reading a sign in a language he almost understands. The cowboy stepped forward 1 pace. "You know me," he said to the deputy, keeping it plain. "You know I keep peace on my side." The deputy nodded. "Once." The cowboy held his gaze. "If I tell you this path has been a road for longer than any of our papers, will you write that in your report?" The deputy's mouth worked like he was shaping a yes, but a different word came out. "I can note your statement," he said. A small sentence. Maybe a thin bridge. The riders did not move toward the deputies. The deputies did not move toward the riders. For a long breath, everything balanced like a coin on its edge. Then the elder turned his horse and tipped his chin. The 100 riders shifted. The honor ride flowed around the windmill like water around a rock. No one raised a voice. No one claimed victory. The dust settled behind them, and the wind used its time the way wind always does. They left the known place and turned. Toward the place the cowboy did not know. The land changed as they went. The ridges sharpened. The wash narrowed and then fell into a cut wider than he remembered, the color of old bone. Ravens circled, not bothered by people, only curious. The trail bent toward a canyon that cut the desert like a page folded back. Here the flags were fewer, but the signs deeper. Tire tracks with thick tread. A stack of drilled cores lying like chalk bones. A wire cage around a square of ground. The cowboy saw a whiteboard on a stake, with numbers he couldn't read from the saddle. He saw a spool of cable and a crate marked with black symbols you see when work gets loud. He felt a new kind of quiet go through the riders. A listening quiet. A "we will not touch what is not ours" quiet. The elder stopped where the earth began to fall away into the canyon and sat without. Speaking, the young woman edged her horse forward until she was beside the cowboy. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. "Once," she said, "my brother was lost on this side. Night came early. A man on a bay lit a small fire and left dry wood and a note that said, "Go east." "Listen for wind through cottonwood." He did as the note said. He came home. She looked at the bay and then at the cowboy. "I think that was you." He thought about the night the wind sounded like broken glass. He remembered the small fire under a ledge and the wood he left stacked in a cross so the next person would see it. He had written the note because a voice in his head, the first voice he ever trusted, had told him to. He nodded just once. The woman nodded back. No more words needed. The elder dismounted and walked to the edge. The cowboy followed on foot. The canyon opened under them, old and quiet as sleep. He didn't know the stories cut into these walls, and he would not pretend to. He only knew that some places ask you to be smaller, and this was one of them. The elder raised his hand and pointed to a line of rock where the light struck and made a shape the cowboy almost recognized. It wasn't a picture you could take. It was a contour, a grain. The elder spoke without looking over. "This is the other place," he said. "It holds names you cannot read and names we are not supposed to speak here. The work planned for this corner would bruise the rock and make the old road teach silence instead of memory." The cowboy let his breath out slow. That was the main conflict laid bare. Not a quarrel between two men. A strain between paper and ground, between a lawful plan and a longer promise. The $1 coin in his pocket seemed heavier, as if the metal knew more than he did. The second coin burned hotter against his palm until he had to turn it over. He looked back along the trail. 100 riders waited with their horses facing forward, eyes on the elder. Far behind them, another dust cloud lifted. Not deputies this time. Trucks. White paint. Antennas wagging. A slow roll, not afraid. The cowboy could already hear the pitch of their engines. The hopeful hum of people who believe work is always a good word. Between the riders and the trucks, the wind stirred and then settled. The elder turned and handed the cowboy the strip of leather again. This time, the mark on it seemed to shift in the light. A river one moment, and a path the next. "We ask you one more thing," he said. "When they arrive, speak first. Not for us. For yourself. Tell them the truth you carry. Speak as if you were teaching a first word." The cowboy swallowed. His throat felt raw, like he had already shouted. But he hadn't. He had not raised his voice once today. He thought of the face that had taught him his first word. He thought of a mug of coffee with steam rising like a prayer. He thought of how that face had looked at him, like a person, not a project. He let that memory stand in front of him, a shield made of warmth. Hoofbeats shifted behind him. The bass stamped once, impatient, then stilled at a touch. The riders pulled in a little tighter around the lip of the canyon, leaving a clear space where the trucks would stop. The deputy from earlier had followed at a distance and now sat off to one side. Hat low, watching both lines of dust come together. He had a pen in his pocket and a crease in his brow, like a man who will write what he sees, even if he is not sure how anyone will read it. The truck slowed and spread in a neat fan, doors opening with quick clacks. Men and women in clean hats stepped down, bright vests catching the sun. The foreman, or someone like him, glanced once at the riders and then at the canyon. Little lines forming at the corners of his eyes. His gaze found the flags and the crate and the board. He took a breath like a man adding columns in his head. He started to speak to the deputy first, then saw the elder, then saw the cowboy. He paused, caught between the plan in his briefcase and the fact on the ground. The elder did not speak. The riders did not speak. The canyon did not speak. The cowboy stepped forward and felt the 2 coins shift in his vest like a heartbeat finding a rhythm. He lifted his chin. He opened his mouth, and the first word formed against his teeth. Small and clear and sharp as a new nail. But before he could say it, the wind turned and a sound rose from the canyon itself, low, steady, almost like a voice talking through stone. Every head turned toward that sound. Even the trucks seemed to lean in, engines ticking as they cooled. The cowboy held the word on his tongue. The elder smiled without showing his teeth. The foreman shaded his eyes and waited. The next move, the next word. The next cut on the maple of it hung there, a coin on edge, one breath from falling. And in that breath, The cowboy understood that whatever he said would not end the conflict. It would only set its true shape. He drew an air that tasted like dust and sage and old rain. He felt the bay's patience at his back. He felt 100 riders holding still without strain. He felt the first face he had ever trusted looking at him from somewhere just ahead, past the glare, past the flags, past the neat boxes on the paper. He closed his hand around the leather and the second coin. And the world waited to hear whether he would speak for paper or for road, for jobs or for names, for a lawful plan or a long promise, for both, or for something else no one had written yet. The sound rising from the canyon was steady, like breath drawn through a wooden flute. It wasn't loud, but it reached everyone. The foreman's eyes narrowed. The deputy glanced at the elder and then at the cowboy, as if the answer lived between those two faces. The riders held still, saddles creaking in tiny notes, 100 horses listening like people do when a secret is about to be told. The cowboy felt the 2 coins settle against his heart, the $1 token he had taken from the Apache elder. The thin old coin the elder had given back. He stepped forward until his boots touched the line of bright survey flags. He didn't kick them. He didn't cross. He spoke where he stood. "You have papers," he said to the foreman. "I have a word. This road through the desert is older than any map. This windmill and this canyon have kept people alive at dawn and at dark. I can't stop your trucks, but I can tell you what the land asked of me. It asked me to keep a gate open and to return what was not mine. It asked me to carry a promise like a coin that never spends out." The foreman shifted his weight. He was not a cruel man. He looked like someone who solved problems for a living and wanted this one to behave like the rest. "We're permitted to test a small charge," he said. "Safety checked. The canyon wall is stable. We flag, we core, we mark a bypass. We work careful, we finish, we leave the place better than we found it." The elder watched him with a calm that did not invite a fight. "What you call better," he said softly, "has a cost you do not yet count." A woman in a bright vest stepped from behind the foreman, tablet under her arm. She glanced at the riders and then at the bay gelding. Her voice was quiet. "We were told this section was clear of cultural sites," she said. "No registered markers, no recorded names." The young rider who had shown the disc rode a step forward. She lifted the small metal circle again. "Not all names live on paper," she said. "Some live in the way a wind moves at dusk. Some live in a road that is walked by people who never sign a ledger." The deputy wrote something on his pad without looking down. The pen scratched like a cricket. The cowboy let the silence work. In the dust behind the trucks, the rest of the crew waited, hands on belts, palms clean, eyes honest and tired. Not villains. Workers with a schedule and a promise of pay. The world is made of schedules and pay, the cowboy thought. And also of promises that do not fit in a box. The foreman checked his watch. "We're behind," he said, not to threaten, more to confess. "We have a noon window to fire the test. Then a geotech reads the wall. Then we go. I can delay an hour. Not more." The elder turned to the cowboy. "1 hour," he said. "Is that enough to speak a first word, right?" The cowboy nodded once. The elder lifted his palm, and the riders breathed out as one. No parade, no speech. Just a shift, like shade moving across a stone. Work began in a careful way that felt like ceremony. 2 crew members unspooled a slim line toward the drill holes. A red lamp blinked on a small box below, patient, not warning yet. The foreman sent 1 truck to fetch a radio signal repeater. The deputy stepped to the side and called someone, voice low, face turned to the wind. The riders edged into a long arc, leaving a clear aisle to the canyon lip. The bay gelding's ears moved like twin compass needles. Taking the measure of every sound, the cowboy walked to a flat rock near the edge. He placed the thin old coin on its face and set the $1 coin on top of it. He looked at the foreman, then at the crew, then at the deputy, and then at the elder. "I will speak until this coin falls," he said. "When it falls, you can decide if the road is only lines on paper or something else? No one laughed. The canyon wind pressed up from below and made the leather strings on the rider's reins lift and tap. The cowboy told them about the bundle of red cloth. He told them about nights he'd left wood under ledges and notes written in pencil that said, "Go east or wait for the second star." He told them about the windmill that had groaned like an old hymn and the way water tastes when you've given up on water. He did not tell heroic stories. He told small ones. The kind that live in the cracks of a life and hold the walls up. The hours stretched like rawhide. The blinking red lamp changed its pace slower, then quicker, then steady. The geotech crouched at the rim, notebook open, eyes on the rock face. He had the look of a person who loves stone, who can tell the age of a ridge by touch. Once he leaned to the foreman and said something too low to carry. The foreman nodded and said, "Log it." The deputy moved closer to the riders without meaning to. He seemed to want the shade their horses made. He spoke to the young rider. "Is that the only disc?" he asked. She shook her head. She pointed to the bay. A second disc hung under the throat latch, tied with a narrow strip of red cloth. The deputy rode again, jaw tight, eyes softer. The crew finished their checks. A worker lifted a small flag to signal armed but safe. The foreman raised his hand to shoulder height and kept it there. The canyon sound deepened, a low tone that made the ribs feel hollow. The cowboy could taste metal, a penny at the tongue taste, like old rain or new fear. Clouds climbed the far ridge with the quiet speed of a cat. The sun thinned. The desert smell changed creosote, readying itself for rain. The elder's gaze went to the dark edge of the sky and then returned to the foreman as if to say, "We are not the only ones with a clock." From the truck, a radio crackled. A voice asked for status. The foreman answered plain, armed, standing by. His eyes went to the coins. The $1 piece was still balanced on the thin old one edge on stone. The cowboy felt the weight of that balance in his chest. The hour was nearly gone. He could hear the math ticking in the foreman's head. He could feel the rider's patience held like water in a cupped hand. The elder stepped to the cowboy's side. He did not touch him. He spoke for only him to hear. "When the coin falls, speak the word you carried," he said. "Not a speech, a word. The first one you learned, the one you were told to keep." The cowboy swallowed and kept the face in his mind, the one that steadied a cup, the one that taught a first word slow and kind. He looked down at the canyon, then up at the crew, then across at the deputy. The deputy's hand tightened on his pad. The geotech lifted his chin as if scenting rain inside rock. A small boy appeared at the back of the crew line, peeking from the open door of a truck. Someone's son, hair stuck to his forehead, eyes wide. He caught the cowboy's stare and didn't look away. He didn't smile. He just watched, and the cowboy felt his knees go loose for a heartbeat. That gaze was the same gaze he had kept in his chest all morning. Born on another morning years ago, the foreman lowered his hand an inch. The radio crackled again. "Window closing," the voice said. "If we don't fire, we lose the day." A worker by the box lifted a cover. The red lamp changed its blink, now quick and bright, like a heart hurrying. Wind pushed hard up the canyon and then stopped all at once, as if the desert had decided to hold its breath. The coin on the rock quivered. It did not fall. The foreman's jaw worked. He looked at the elder, at the riders, at the deputy, at the boy in the truck. He saw all of them at once, and none of them fully. He reached for the radio, hesitated, then set it down. The bay gelding tossed its head and stamped twice, then froze. The young rider's fingers tightened on the reins. The elder's eyes went to the far ridge again, darker now, the clouds sewn tight together. Somewhere beyond sight, thunder shaped itself without sound, thick and low. The geotech turned his head sharply toward the canyon wall. He held a hand up, not to stop, but to listen. A fine trickle of dust slipped from a seam thin as smoke and then stopped. He leaned close and whispered to the rock, or maybe to himself. The foreman saw it and stood taller, like a man holding a door against a draft. The deputy cleared his throat. He did not give an order. He only said, "I'm noting unusual conditions." His voice tried to be dry and failed. It shook. He underlined something on his pad hard enough to tear the paper. The radio voice returned, impatient now. 2 minutes, it said. Make the call. The foreman lifted his palm. It hovered there, uncertain, a half-built bridge. He looked again at the coin. The edge trembled, the metal ringing in a sound so fine it barely existed. The cowboy bent close, as if speaking to a skittish colt. He did not touch it. He did not breathe on it. He let his word gather at the back of his mouth, small and bright and heavy. Around him the honor ride moved without moving. 100 riders leaned in by a hair, the kind of lean you do when a story hits its sharpest turn. The young rider closed her eyes, and then opened them. Steady. The boy in the truck put a hand on the doorframe, knuckles white. The worker by the box shifted his weight from heel to toe and back again. The geotech held up 2 fingers, not a count, a warning, a wish. The elder stood with his hands open, empty and full at once. The coin began to tip. The first click of metal on stone sounded louder than the sky. The red lamp steadied into a hard burn. The radio hissed with a rush of words that no one answered. Wind climbed the canyon one more time, carrying the smell of rain and the taste of long names not meant for paper. The coin slid another degree. Every eye followed it. Every breath in that place matched its slow fall. The cowboy felt the word leave his chest and rise toward his teeth. He opened his mouth, and just before the coin could choose a side, the bay threw its ears hard toward the ridge. The canyon gave a second deeper note. The foreman's hand lifted another inch. The worker's thumb hovered over a switch. The deputy set his foot without meaning to. The boy leaned forward. And the sky itself seemed to bend. The coin hung there at the edge of the rock, the world holding still with it. All the weight of paper and road, of lawful plan and long promise, of $1 bond and honor ride, gathering into the thinnest slice of metal, waiting for the smallest touch to decide which way everything would go. The coin chose its side, the way rain chooses where to fall. It gave a tiny ring, slid, and lay flat. In the same instant, one large drop hit the rock and split into a shining star. The smell of wet dust rose like memory. The canyon's low tone deepened, and the geotech lifted both hands without thinking, a quiet plea to pause. The foreman froze with his palm still raised. No one spoke. Every eye went to the coin beaded with that single drop of water. The cowboy let the word leave his mouth, soft and clear. Water, he said. It wasn't a speech. It was a fact, a request, a law older than paper. The boy in the truck mouthed the word at the same time, almost like they had practiced together in another life. The elder dipped his head. The young rider closed her fingers over the little disc, then opened them again, letting it catch the dim light. The geotech stepped to the foreman's shoulder. Hear that? He asked low. There's a vein running behind the face. A seep at least. Maybe more. You blast here, you open a wound. He pointed to a faint dark line that the new shade made visible. See it? It's traveling. It'll drain the pocket or drown the cut. Either way, we lose the wall and we lose the road. The foreman looked. The shape sharpened in his view, like a map that finally made sense. He didn't curse. He didn't shrug. He let the information land. The radio crackled again with the edge of impatience, but he didn't reach for it. He spoke to the crew instead. Stand down, he said. Safe out procedures. Pull the line. Log the seep. We're not firing here. The worker by the box flipped the cover down. The red lamp softened to a slow blink, then went dark. A long, thin breath moved through the riders, not relief only, but release, like a string pulled tight now eased. The deputy wrote one sentence large, clear, no crossouts. He underlined it once. He looked at the cowboy and gave a small nod that said, I saw what you did, and I will say so. Rain did not pour. It stitched the air with single drops, spaced like careful words. The elder stepped forward and placed his palm an inch above the coin, as if blessing a small flag. You spoke the right first word, he said to the cowboy. The land heard you. So did these people. The foreman walked over, hat in hand now. He wasn't defeated. He looked like a man who had just been handed a new problem he respected. "We'll reroute," he said. "Might cost us time and more money, but we'll do it. I'll call the office, and I'll ask for a cultural survey team to meet us. If there's a road older than ours, we'll mark it. If there's water under this rock, we won't bruise it." The elder met his eyes without heat. "Meet not just a team," he said. "Aid us. Meet the people who carry the road in their bodies. We don't need credit. We need a promise we can check with our feet." The foreman nodded. "You'll have it. We'll schedule something that isn't just a handshake. We'll make marks that last." He looked at the deputy. "You heard me." The deputy tapped his pad. "I heard," he said, "and I'll file it." The young rider turned her horse and looped a long strip of red cloth through the wire cage that guarded the square of ground. Not to claim it. To name it in the only way that matters out here. A gentle sign that says, "We pass through with care." She looked at the boy who had come closer, his small hand flat on the truck door. "What did you hear?" she asked him. He swallowed and answered without looking at anyone else. "Water," he said. The elder smiled. "Good," he said. "That is a word you carry your whole life." They left the canyon the way people leave a quiet church, with boots soft and mouths closed. The crew packed their lines and crates with more attention than before, as if the boxes had learned to breathe. The foreman made a call at last. He spoke without drama. "We're moving the test." "Yes, I know the window." "No, we're not firing. I'll explain on the record." Back at the windmill, the flags still bit the dirt with their bright teeth. The cowboy walked to the post where the map had flapped and pulled the paper free. He folded it, not to throw away, but to keep. Then he lifted the gate and tied it back so wide a truck could have passed through sideways. He looked at the deputy. "Will your report say this gate is meant to swing?" The deputy drew one more line on his page. "It will," he said. The elder asked for the cowboy's word there in front of the trough. "When the work shifts and people wander, you keep the water on," he said. "And when someone asks you why, you say, 'Because the land asked me, and I said yes.'" The cowboy put his hand on the pump handle and felt its old shoulder bones under the paint. "I'll keep it going," he said. "And if it breaks, I'll fix it. I've done it before. I'll do it again." The bay gelding turned its head and pressed its nose to the cowboy's sleeve, the same old way, like a small bow between friends. The elder watched the touch. "A horse can belong to more than one road," he said. "This gelding will stand at your fence when you need him. He will stand at ours when we call. He will carry only what's right. Agreed?" The cowboy's eyes stung more than the rain could justify. "Agreed," he said. And it felt easier than breathing. The young rider untied the small disc from the horse's throat latch and pressed it into the deputy's palm. "For your report," she said. "Not as evidence. As weight." The deputy turned it over without closing his fingers, as if it were a bird he was not allowed to keep. "I'll bring it back," he said, and she said, "We'll know if you forget." The foreman and the geotech came to the trough. They cupped water and drank. The geotech wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I used to think rock didn't care," he said to no one in particular. "But I've been wrong before. Today, I'm glad to be wrong again." The foreman set his hat back on. "We'll need a new line," he said to the cowboy. "It may pass near your north fence. I'll come by with a map, and we'll look at it together. Not a sail, a talk." The cowboy nodded. "Bring a pencil," he said. "I've got a table that understands erasing." The riders formed a long line then, not in ceremony, but in quiet routine. They moved past the windmill in twos, touching their hats or their chests, leaving behind small signs that could survive weather, a length of rawhide on a hinge, a neat rock placed where a boot can trip if you don't look down, a scrap of red cloth tied to a thorn. The young rider paused and met the cowboy's eyes. "My brother sends thanks," she said. "He drinks slow now. Learned that from the night you rode him east." The cowboy felt a laugh catch in his throat and stay. "Tell him to keep a pencil," he said. Roads change. When the last rider had passed, the elder stayed. He took the thin old coin from the cowboy's palm and held it up. "This belonged to someone who did what you did," he said. "He kept a gate open when it would have been smarter to close it. He built a small fire where no one could see and moved on without waiting for thanks. He is gone. His work is not. Carry this until you meet someone who needs to feel its weight more than you do." The elder set the old coin back and then touched the $1 piece with a fingertip. "As for this," he said, "remember that we used money to make a promise too small to break. You sold your last horse and we turned that sale into a bond. Today, we returned part of that bond." He nodded toward the bay. "The rest will return over time, the way rain returns to a dry year. Not all at once. Enough." The cowboy looked around at the faces, at the deputy writing his last line, at the foreman speaking into the radio with the edge gone from his voice, at the boy repeating water under his breath like a secret rhyme he didn't want to forget. He felt a simple thing he had not felt in a long time. He was not alone in his choices. By late afternoon, the clouds moved on, leaving the desert rinsed and sharp. The trucks pulled away in a slow column, back toward other ridges and other problems. The deputy closed his notebook and tucked it carefully into his shirt like a letter. He tipped his hat to the cowboy. "I'll be back," he said. "With paper that says what we saw," the cowboy nodded. "Bring 2 copies," he said. "One for the windmill, one for the gate." The riders turned their horses toward the far horizon. The elder brought the bay close one last time. "At dawn next year," he said, "if the road is still open and the water still runs, you'll hear us again. Not 100, maybe. Numbers are for counting. Will come as many as the road calls for." The cowboy smiled with the small muscles a smile uses when it's real. "I'll keep the coffee hot," he said, and the gate loose. They rode out as they had arrived, quiet and sure, hooves writing soft notes the wind could read. The desert went back to its own music, a hawk stitching air, a far-off coyote trying new vowels against the coming dark, the slow pump of the windmill turning each breeze into a promise kept. The cowboy sat on the fence rail as the light thinned to gold, then copper, then the kind of blue that tastes like sleep. He laid both coins on his thigh. The $1 piece shone like a small sun. The old coin was dull and perfect, thin as a story told the right number of times. He turned them over and over until his fingers learned them by feel. Then he slipped the old coin into his vest pocket above his heart and the dollar into the small pocket inside the pocket that only he used, place made for tokens that need to stay. Night came. 1 star, then 3, then more than a person should count. He carried a bucket to the trough, though it was already full. He set the bucket down and listened to the creek he loved, that old hymn that meant someone could drink here without asking permission. He thought of the bundle of red cloth he had once returned, of the boy who found a fire, of the young rider who had tied a reminder to a post, of the deputy who had chosen his words with care, of the foreman who had chosen not to fire, of the geotech who had listened to stone. He thought of the YouTube story some folks might tell about a poor cowboy who sold his last horse for $1 to an Apache elder and then saw 100 riders arrive at dawn to honor him. He hoped if they told it, they'd use the right keywords on a ride. Desert, road, windmill, canyon, promise, but more than that, he hoped they'd keep the quiet parts, the small acts. The water, before he went in, he walked to the gate and gave it a push. It swung easy the way a good word does when you don't force it. He tied it open for the night. He didn't worry. The land would watch. It always had. A coyote called once, bored with its own cleverness. The cowboy laughed under his breath and shook his head. Inside, he set a clean mug near the stove and laid the 2 coins side by side where the morning light would find them. He wrote 1 line on a scrap of paper and stuck it under the old coin so it wouldn't drift. Keep the water on. He blew out the lamp and stood for a moment in the soft dark, listening to the wind lay down. He thought about the first face he had been told to remember, and he thanked it. And he promised it he would try to be the sort of man who teaches that first word right when someone needs it in the quiet. The story ended the only way it could, not with a crowd cheering, not with a fight, not with a clean victory, but with a gate left open, a trough brimmed, a road both old and new held together by small hands. The coins cooled. The night held. And somewhere beyond the ridge, 100 riders faded into starlight, carrying a promise that had begun as a token and grown into a road you could walk without fear.